Courtrooms are supposed to be the safest rooms in the building, but sometimes, all it takes is one moment for everything to fall apart. From hidden weapons to last-second escapes and final acts no one sees coming, these cases prove that even in front of a judge, chaos can erupt without warning. It started with a quiet courtroom in Brazil, where everyone thought the hearing would play out like any other. But sitting in the crowd was a man who had no intention of watching the trial end peacefully. Cristiano Alves Terto had come to face the man accused of ending his father's life during an argument over a missing donkey, a feud that had already torn their families apart. As witnesses spoke and lawyers debated, Terto slowly made his way toward the front of the room. At first, nothing about him seemed unusual, but his sister noticed the look in his eyes. She tried to hold him back, whispering for him to stop, but he pushed past her without hesitation. In a split second, the room erupted. Terto pulled out a hidden gun, stormed toward the defendant's table, and opened fire. People dove for cover, and the judge scrambled behind the desk as bullets shattered the calm. Even after the gun ran dry, Terto kept swinging the empty weapon before sprinting out of the courtroom. By the time officers reached the injured man, he was still breathing, a twist no one expected after such a close-range attack. And while Terto was eventually caught, this shocking moment was only the beginning of a long list of courtroom eruptions that followed. But what happened next in a different courtroom would push the chaos even further. In a Utah courtroom packed with officers, lawyers, and witnesses, a former gang member began describing the violent world he'd once been part of. Everyone knew the testimony was dangerous, but no one expected what would happen next. Sitting just a few feet away was Kale Angelo, a 25-year-old tied to robbery, weapons charges, and a string of gang-related crimes. As the witness revealed more details, Angola's calm started to crack. His breathing changed, his posture shifted, and then he snapped. Without warning, he lunged forward, ripped a pen out of an attorney's hand, and charged straight at the witness. His plan was simple and brutal: silence the man exposing his gang. He barely made it over the divider before a U.S. Marshal reacted instantly. Multiple shots rang through the courtroom, echoing off the walls as officers shouted for everyone to get down. Angolo collapsed before he ever reached his target. The witness survived without a scratch. Angolo didn't, and the entire room realized how quickly a simple object, something as harmless as a pen, could turn a courtroom into a split-second life-or-death situation. But the next case didn't end with an attack. It started with a defendant who turned all that violence on himself. In Nebraska, the trial of Aubrey Trail had already captured national attention. He was facing severe charges connected to the disappearance of Sidney Loof, and investigators claimed they had receipts, video footage, and a trail of purchases that painted a disturbing picture. Trail insisted the story was twisted, but the evidence kept stacking up. Still, throughout the hearings, he carried himself with a strange confidence, almost as if he believed he could talk his way out of everything. But when prosecutors laid out more details tying him to the crime, something inside him shifted. As the courtroom watched him closely, Trail suddenly stood up and yelled that his girlfriend was innocent. In one quick motion, he revealed a small razor he had smuggled in and dragged it across his own neck, again and again. Panic erupted instantly. Officers rushed forward, the judge shouted for help, and the entire room dissolved into chaos. Miraculously, Trail survived, but when he returned for the next hearing, he was locked down with restraints so tight he could barely move. Even then, he tried to twist the narrative one more time, giving a long explanation of the night Loof died, refusing to apologize, and telling the court he wouldn't ask for forgiveness. People expected him to show remorse. Instead, he stood there emotionless, describing the choices that would define the rest of his life. But as shocking as his outburst was, the next defendant took things even further, using a hidden substance that stunned everyone watching. Michael Marin wasn't the kind of man people expected to see on trial. He was a millionaire, a former Wall Street trader, a Yale law graduate, even a mountain climber who had reached altitudes most people never dream of. His life looked polished and successful from every angle, until his luxurious Arizona mansion mysteriously went up in flames. Marin barely escaped, later telling investigators he survived thanks to a scuba tank he kept inside the house. But detectives didn't buy it. After digging into the scene, they announced their findings. The fire hadn't been an accident. It was intentionally set. When Marin walked into court to face arson and fraud charges, he still carried himself like a man who believed things would work out. But the moment the jury read the verdict, guilty, everything changed. If you watch the footage closely, you can see it happen in a matter of seconds. Marin reaches toward his mouth, slips something onto his tongue, and swallows. No one notices at first. But as the judge begins speaking, Marin's body starts to convulse. He coughs, shakes, and collapses as officers rush toward him. The courtroom is thrown into chaos. Doctors later confirmed what everyone feared: he had taken cyanide. Whatever future Marin was facing, he cut it short in an instant. But not every courtroom disaster ends with someone choosing their fate. In the next case, the violence wasn't directed inward, it was aimed straight at a judge. In Kentucky, a courthouse full of routine hearings was shattered by something far more personal. Former Sheriff Sean Steins walked in not as an officer, but as a man accused of first-degree murder, and the victim was someone he once worked closely with, Judge Kevin Mullins. Security footage revealed how fast everything unraveled. Stein entered the judge's office, and the two immediately fell into a heated argument. No one knows exactly what set Stein off, but the tension boiled over in seconds. He pulled out a weapon and fired. The judge dove under his desk, but Stein stepped forward and shot him again at point-blank range. Even after the judge stopped moving, Stein fired a final round before walking out of the office as if the confrontation was over. Officers swarmed the courthouse within minutes and arrested him, but the damage was already done. Stein later pleaded not guilty, and the case is still unfolding, leaving the public stunned that someone sworn to uphold the law could cause the kind of chaos most people only expect from hardened criminals. But the next case didn't involve a former sheriff or a gang member. It was an ordinary man who walked into a school board meeting with a plan that almost cost several lives. In Florida, what started as a routine school board meeting turned into a moment nobody in the room would ever forget. Clay Duke walked in quietly, waited for his turn to speak, and then revealed the real reason he was there. His family was struggling, his wife had been fired, and he blamed the board for everything that had gone wrong in their lives. Before anyone could react, Duke pulled out a gun and ordered every woman in the room to leave. Chairs scraped, people scrambled out, and the men on the board suddenly found themselves staring down the barrel of a weapon with nowhere to run. One of the women, Ginger Littleton, couldn't accept leaving her coworkers behind. She slipped back in, armed with nothing but a purse, and swung it at Duke in a desperate attempt to knock the gun away. He barely flinched. With a quick movement, he threw her to the ground, and she scrambled out as officers rushed toward the building. Back inside, the board chair tried to reason with him. He pleaded, offered help, even said he'd personally find Duke's wife a new job if it would calm him down. But Duke wasn't listening anymore. He fired, again, and again, bullets slamming into the wall behind the chair as the man begged him to stop. Miraculously, not a single shot hit anyone. As Duke prepared to fire again, the school's security officer, a former police veteran, burst through the doorway. He fired several rounds, hitting Duke in the legs and forcing him to the floor. Wounded and cornered, Duke made one final decision before officers could reach him. No one else in the room was harmed. A miracle considering how quickly the situation spiraled out of control. But as shocking as this ambush was, the next courtroom meltdown came from a man who waited until the exact second he heard his sentence to unleash chaos. At the International Criminal Tribunal in The Hague, the atmosphere was heavy long before the verdict was read. Slobodan Praljak, a major figure from the Bosnian War, sat calmly as judges prepared to deliver their decision. He had spent years insisting he was innocent despite accusations of brutal attacks and war crimes. When the judge finally announced that his 20-year sentence would be upheld, Praljak didn't argue, shout, or even hesitate. Instead, he stood up, raised his voice, and said the words no one expected to hear in a courtroom: that he rejected the judgment entirely. As guards moved toward him, Prowljack pulled out a small bottle, tilted his head back, and drank the liquid inside before anyone could stop him. The moment people realized what he'd done, panic ricocheted through the chamber. Judges froze. Attorneys shouted. Officers rushed forward as Prowljack announced that he had taken poison. Within seconds, the courtroom was shut down. Curtains closed. Proceedings suspended. Medical teams raced in. But despite everything, Prowljack didn't survive. His final act stunned the world, not only because he managed to sneak a deadly substance into one of the most secure courtrooms on the planet, but because he chose to make that moment his last statement to everyone watching. And yet, the next case shows that you don't need power or a long list of charges to send a courtroom into total chaos. Sometimes, all it takes is a teenager who refuses to accept his sentence. In Ohio, 19-year-old Cyrus Matthews stepped into court believing he could talk his way out of trouble. He was facing time for a road rage incident, and when the judge asked if he had anything to say, Matthews delivered a calm, almost polished apology. He talked about responsibility, about learning from mistakes, and about understanding the danger he had caused. But when the judge made it clear he was going to jail that day, the entire mood shifted. Matthews didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply turned and walked toward the exit like the hearing was over. Officers shouted for him to stop, warning him he'd be hit with extra charges if he left, but he kept moving. In the hallway, a bailiff tried to reason with him, but the second he saw his girlfriend waiting nearby, everything snapped. They bolted for the doors together. Within minutes, police were chasing him through town as he sped through red lights, swerved around cars, and pushed his vehicle well past the limit in a desperate attempt to escape the sentence he'd just been given. The chase ended in a violent crash. Matthews' car slammed into an SUV carrying a mother and her baby, mangling both vehicles and knocking down a gas station sign. Miraculously, the family survived with minor injuries. Officers had to break apart the wreck just to reach Matthews and his girlfriend. The moment they pulled him out, he broke down completely, shaking, crying, and struggling to breathe as he realized how close he had come to ending someone else's life. That decision to run added more than a year to his sentence. And these cases are just a glimpse of the chaos that erupts when emotions explode in places built to deliver justice. Courtrooms are meant to be controlled, quiet, and orderly. Places where the truth is sorted out and justice is delivered. But when fear, anger, or desperation takes over, even the safest rooms can turn unpredictable in an instant. From revenge attempts to secret poisons and last-second escapes, these moments show how quickly a legal hearing can transform into something no one is prepared for. And the most unsettling part? None of these people planned to lose control that day, but once they did, the entire courtroom paid the price.